Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an aggressive, entitled Karen hated my passion for meat and barbecues. She is vegan and absolutely insane. She ended up shooting my son at a birthday barbecue party. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. And the first one starts like this. For those of you that might not be aware, here where I live, and by the way I had to censor that because OP was providing way too much info about where he comes from, there was a pretty big rise in veganism. Something that more of you might know is that a lot of neighborhoods are starting things similar to an HOA, but without that official title. The only difference being that here they seem to be even more aggressive and less controlled than in other countries like America. Since I'm using their term of HOA, I'm also gonna go ahead and use their term for horrible women, a Karen. Karen is a very bad type of vegan in that she tries to push it heavily on everybody else. Since she is also part of the HOA, she tries to make it a rule that cooking meat outdoors is illegal. She cannot actually do this, and all her pushing does is make people dislike her. Not only does she push vegan food onto everybody, but insults everybody that eats meat and tells them how they are going to hell. I don't want to get too much into the religious breakdown, but we have many religions here. Her telling people that they have to follow what God wants, and if we eat meat he will send us to hell, is extremely uncomfortable. This has caused nobody in the neighborhood to like Karen or want to invite her to anything. We are not a huge neighborhood, so when somebody has a party, it's common for a lot of people that live nearby to just pop in and celebrate whatever it is. Karen, though, is always excluded and never talked about these things because in the past she would attempt to stop or control it. Again, mainly about the food and demanding that she gets to approve everything despite it not being her party to begin with. It was an easy decision for my son's 9th birthday to not invite Karen, especially because we were having a barbecue outside. I was gonna be cooking a lot of meat and Karen being there would have caused insane problems. I only lived 2 doors down from her, so I knew that once the party was going on with music and people, she would wander in. I was just waiting for that so I could stop her before she got too far and make her leave. Me? Whoa, no, you cannot come here. Karen, I can smell that you're cooking meat. And this is exactly why I was stopping her. Me, I'm not letting you come in here and start crap with the whole vegan thing. If you don't want to eat meat, fine, but leave us out of it. Karen, you're trying to send all of these people to hell by forcing them to consume meat. Me, we have plenty of other food options and nobody is being forced to eat anything. My son loves barbecue and since it is his birthday, that means he gets to decide. Karen, you are making a child go to hell because you refuse to listen? I need to save him from you so he can get into heaven. I had enough of her and forced her out with a couple other family members that I warned about her. Nothing violent, just a firm steering off of my property. I also feel after saying that stuff to her, I need to point out to you guys that I have no issues with people being vegan. In fact, since it is so popular here, there were a handful of vegans already at the party. They had food they could eat and did not try and convert anybody or stop them from eating whatever they wanted. And by the way guys, to be honest, that is the experience I had with most vegans I met in real life. They don't really try to force their diet on you, because that is usually what you hear from these crazy vegans in stories. Anyway, Karen did not like being told no and was kicked out of the party. I really didn't expect her to have a gun at all. Our laws are very strict with guns, so her having it off the bat I knew meant that she would go to jail. While a legal gun is possible, there are many hoops and other things that I knew she did not do. If I saw her with the gun, I would have probably tackled her to the ground because of how insane she was acting before. So I did not notice when she came back with the gun until it went off and all eyes jumped to the gunfire. That only lasted a second for me because then I heard the screams of my son and saw blood coming from his foot. Karen had not only come to the party with a gun, not only did she shoot the gun off, but she had aimed for a 9-year-old boy on his birthday. I wanted to kill her in that moment and I don't think anybody there would have stopped me. I could not move away from my son and trying to tell him that everything would be fine once we got him to the hospital. Karen, meanwhile, was being restrained by people and waiting for the police to come. I went to the hospital with my son and we were both scared. Luckily, it didn't end up going through his foot and instead just grazed it. It was not great, but he would live and not have any issues walking or running or anything like that. I felt so bad that he had to spend his birthday in the hospital and promised him that I would take him somewhere special, just the 2 of us, when he was feeling better. He was in good spirits at least and the nurses all came in and tried to make him feel better. Back to Karen, she ended up in a lot of trouble for what she did that day. She had no way to deny it either, with all of the people seeing her do it, plus the actual gunshot injury of my son. First of all, I was right in the fact that she had no business having that gun to begin with. That alone got her 7 years in prison before we even started on the fact that she fired it and hit him. I'm no expert in the law, so I don't want to make any big assumptions. I've heard that for shooting somebody, even if they are fine, you can still end up getting life in prison or the death penalty here even. Again, we have extremely strict gun laws. With Karen though, it was a little difficult because they were debating if she was of sound mind. If she was actually crazy, then she could not be sentenced to death for that. Apparently, since her arrest, she had not stopped talking about God killing meat eaters and sending them all to hell. That she needed to cleanse my son to protect him. They had to give her medication to calm her down enough to actually try and talk to her. After she was examined professionally though, it appeared that she knew exactly what she was doing and was just putting on an act. When she didn't think people were watching her, she was calm, but then when people walked into the room, she pretended to be talking to God and all that stuff again. She was sent to prison for what I believe was a life sentence if I'm recalling it correctly. It was a while back and the potential sentences kept changing and confusing me and are now all muddled in my brain. The neighborhood is much happier with her gone and my son did get a fun day out to make up for his party having to end in the way it did. He does have a cool story with a scar to show his friends and I'm just left with one question. Do you think the prison serves meat? And yeah, ripe stars, let's hope that Karen never sees the outside of a prison ever again. You just cannot excuse what she did. It's impossible. If you like this story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments because that would make me and Disney very happy. Thank you so much. The next one is an XXL revenge story. Backstory: to begin with, I will point out how incredibly screwed up my worldviews on normalcy were as a young child because of the abuse I suffered. I was raised by a single mom, my mother has 2 master degrees, criminology and sociology, and is incredibly manipulative and intelligent, read as sociopath. When I was born, we lived with my grandparents still. My mom was 23 at the time. My mother wanted to continue her college education at the time, and so she got government assistance for childcare, etc. During this time, my mother found out that if you have a special needs child, your benefits allowance was more than doubled. At about the age of 4, she began to severely mentally traumatize me, causing me to lash out in unusual ways that were not recognized by teachers and counselors at the time as being signs and symptoms of abuse. At the age of 4, I was in 1st grade and at the time diagnosed with a condition which is no longer recognized as a mental health condition called ODD. This put me into the special needs program and this began my mom's manipulation of the system via me. When I got older, while I knew these sorts of things were not right, but I didn't question it because at school no one believed me because I was special needs and a pathological liar as cultivated by my mom, which did stoke a lot of real rage in me, which did lead to violent outbursts by me, which were very not good because I was one of those kids who got huge fast, being taller than every teacher I ever had in the 1st grade, hitting 6 foot tall by the age of 11. My mother always cultivated a us versus them mindset in me with her manipulations, especially in regards to my grandparents. I had always grown up poor and my grandparents were multimillionaires who in my childish brain could have stopped a lot of pain and suffering if they only did what my mom asked and helped her the way they helped their other kids. The beginnings of my rebellion came after I finished my 2nd year of college when suddenly my mom could no longer work. Meaning, didn't want to work anymore. She claimed she was too obese and had too many medical conditions to work and filed for a social security disability. I was still living with her at this time, so she expected me to drop out of school to get a job until she could get her disability. I refused, which led to an argument where she called the police and lied to them, claiming domestic violence. I got arrested but never charged. I of course cowed at that point, knowing that if I didn't do what she wanted, I was just gonna go back to jail. This is where I thank whatever god there may be in finding the perfect position where I was an apartment manager and maintenance man. I got to work that job while I finished college in all my free time. After I finished college, I left to try and work in LA with my degree, and after a 2-week failure, I was offered a position doing the same apartment management in Portland. Of course, the moment I got that job, my mom wanted to pick up and move back in with me because she was squatting at a friend's house. Of course I knew if I didn't do that, mom said I was gonna get the shaft again. So of course I relented and she moved in with me, taking up the same roles we had while I was in school. For a time, things were good. I thought I could live a happy, comfortable life doing what I was doing, making a decent living and having loads of free time, as my mom would handle all the management side of the job with accounting, etc., and I would just do all the maintenance. Of course, things were not meant to be, as I found out she was defrauding the owners by fudging the numbers on the accounting. And that means if someone who's not good with accounting could figure it out, that means someone back at the property management was gonna find out soon enough. Sure enough, we were lucky and only let go instead of charged criminally for what she had done, and I could have easily been charged as an accessory. At the time, I basically had become dependent on my mom. She wanted to move to some place with a warmer climate. We moved to a college town in eastern WA where I had been offered a job working at the school in the past. Only this time, it was a job where my mom was not helping me, and so I didn't feel like she deserved any of my money. At this point in the story, her social security still hadn't been approved. But because my mom was not getting what she wanted, fell back on her standard of claiming domestic violence and had me arrested, and she left the city. Later I found out that she moved to the city I now live in at a domestic violence shelter. I got into a terribly toxic relationship, which is another story, but anyways, at the end of the relationship I made the dumb decision to fall back on my mom, who gladly took me back in, because my grandparents had moved to live near her, about a 45-minute drive, and she needed me to manipulate my grandparents into her next plan. Where we live, housing is very scarce, and so my mother begged and pleaded and manipulated my very sick grandfather into buying a house for her and myself. My grandmother convincing my grandfather of it because she knew the crap my mother had put me through and knew that we were not gonna find anything. At the time, my grandmother felt guilty because she knew she should have petitioned for custody of me when I was a kid, because she knew of all the abuse and manipulation I went through, and she did nothing to stop it. She only admitted this to me this year and claims she didn't do anything because she always believed my mom would eventually do the right thing. Within a month of purchasing a small mobile home with suitable living spaces for me and my mom to live separate lives, my grandfather passed away. Having not been added to the will, the house passed into a trust that was controlled by a grandmother. This is when my mom began to ruin the home that my grandfather bought for us by trying to rent out the parking lot space to people with RVs to live in and renting out the 2 extra rooms, as well as starting up an unlicensed and uninsured dodgy daycare. While living there, my mother finally was approved for her social security disability after having to sue for it. And I had managed to get myself into another toxic relationship with another mentally unstable woman, even going so far as to have her move in with me. The wrongdoing? 1 year ago, my now ex went psycho jealous at the end of our relationship, to which she got me fired from my job. My mom decided she didn't need me in her house anymore, since I had lived my purpose of getting her home, and got my ex to file a restraining order against me, essentially getting me kicked out of my own home at 11 p.m. I was even placed on a 72-hour suicide watch after being forced out of my house. The plot: my grandmother, finding out about what happened to me, is furious beyond measure and takes me in and begins the process to try and take the property back from my mom. During this time, a lot of the illegal and other stuff my mother had put me through, I tell my grandmother most of it, some of which she has me report to Social Security, causing her to lose her disability benefits. It's been cathartic, but obviously no substitute for the therapy I ultimately need. Additionally, I start dating the only woman apart from my grandma that actually cares about me, and being able to be honest with her about everything has been helpful and part of why I am writing this. My best friend being the other part of the reason I'm posting this to Reddit, and the only reason I have found such a wonderful woman to date. My grandmother ends up with a final trial date set for today with much of the legal stuff, and a week before today I realize I never told my grandma that the car my mom has been driving around for the last year is my car and is titled and registered in my name. So my grandmother at this point goes into overdrive, speaking with her lawyer on the legalities of everything. She goes with me down to the courthouse and pays for a duplicate title and registration. We take those down to a dealership where they cut a key that matches the VIN number. The revenge: grandmother has her day in court and everything goes her way, and grandma is going to get her house back so that I can move back in the house my grandfather bought for me. But we know that my mom is showing up in my car, so before the judge dismisses the parties, I let myself out of the courtroom and walk outside, and sure enough, there's my car with the windows down and doors unlocked. I open the door, sit down, put the key in, and tragedy, the key won't turn in the ignition. So when my grandma and girlfriend walk out of the courthouse, I quickly wave them over and say the key was not cut properly, so I send them back to the dealership while I sit in the car. This of course could not end without some kind of conflict. My mother comes out of the courthouse seeing me sitting in the car and comes to curse me out and tells me to get the F out of her car. She calls over a sheriff who happens to be nearby and proceeds to get him to try and arrest me. I calmly show the officer the registration to the vehicle showing it's mine. The officer tries to explain that there's nothing he can do as the car is registered, titled and insured in my name, but she continues to whine, to which the officer has none of it and walks away. My mother gets the brilliant idea to call my ex and have my ex come down because I have to stay X number of feet away from her. So I call the local non-emergency line for dispatch and explain the situation of what my mother's plan is to try and force me out of my car. Local PD shows up 4 units because hey, we live in a small boring town and I have to re-explain how I'm trying to take my car. I send my grandma to get the key recut and I'm being harassed, and my ex is coming to try and harass me by getting me arrested on violation of the restraining order. So my ex pulls up while I'm talking to the police and they arrest her on the spot for harassment and violation of the order of protection. Apparently it's felony harassment to use your order of protection to harass the person the order is against. I tell my mom she can have anything out of the car she wants because nothing in the car is mine. She uses a large black trash bag that was in the back to take as much as she can. Finally, grandmother gets back with girlfriend and the new recut key works perfectly. I drive off with my car and park it in grandmother's garage in case my mother decides to come back and try and take it back for herself until I can sell the car. My mother sitting in front of the courthouse holding onto a black trash bag of everything she owns, crying her eyes out, homeless, without a car and without income. And yeah, Ripe Stars, to be honest, I wish there would have even been more revenge on this terrible woman. Also, I have to admit, I did cut some parts of the story out, mainly the one where OP in pretty graphic detail explained how his mother abused him, not only psychologically but also physically, and I don't think it was really fit for a story on YouTube. It was a little bit heavy, to be honest. Either way, respect and props to OP. I hope OP's life improved. The next one is titled Insane Revenge. Hey everybody, to start things off, this story happened back in 2010 when I lived in Miami, Florida with my hubby and his dying uncle. Background: my husband and I moved in with his sick uncle after losing so much during the 2008 housing market crash in the US, like many of my husband's lawn maintenance customers. We also moved in with his uncle into a condo because his uncle had stage 4 cirrhosis of the liver and his self-entitled sister and her family refused to help take care of him. My husband, who is a retired Seminole County Sheriff's officer, important later, and I got ourselves set in the condo's 2 bedrooms as his uncle had himself set up in the living room, including his bed. On the first day, we found dangerous black mold caused by a leaky dishwasher. On the second day, we found the master shower had loose tiles and a leaky shower head. On the third day, we found a nest of brown recluse spiders in the living room. We talked with his uncle about these problems and found out that the slumlord, who is friends with entitled sister/aunt and her family, was refusing to take care of the issues as required by law. We wanted to start legal actions then, but my husband's uncle talked us out of it several times. The slumlord was nice to us so long as my husband's sick uncle was alive. The very next day after my husband's uncle died was a completely different story. Slumlord had turned nasty, aggressive and began to try and strong-arm evictors like we were nothing more than drug addict squatters. Slumlord even bowed up and aggressively tried to fight my husband when we dropped off our next rent check. He kept telling us that we had to move or else, but yet refused to follow actual FL laws to evict us. Slumlord and his corrupt Miami PD code enforcement officer wife even recruited my husband's self-entitled aunt and uncle to start harassing us about just moving even if we had to live in a tent. Self-entitled aunt said, "Why don't you and my RSO nephew just move so they can rent the condo to another senior?" Husband, "We don't have anywhere else to go yet, and he must go through eviction laws or get into very serious trouble." Self-entitled aunt, you're nothing but trouble. Retired SCSD officer nephew. You have been problems since the day you were born. Get out of their condo and stop being a problem for everyone. Who cares if you have to live in a tent? All of this made my retired SCSD officer husband, who specialized in uncovering corrupted law enforcement, very suspicious. We talked and began investigating slumlord and corrupt code enforcement wife. My first order was to place all rent into escrow with evidence of repairs that have been neglected. Second, I sent a notification of cease and desist of harassment to the slumlord and self-entitled aunt. Next, I researched public property tax records. Yeah, pay dirt there. Slumlord's condo was not registered as a rental property with the state of Florida and was paying far less in property taxes than slumlord should have been paying. Property tax records also showed that slumlord did not own the condo. It was still deeded to his mother, which I found out had been living in a retirement home for 5 years before my husband's uncle moved in. My husband found out that corrupt code enforcement wife had been inspecting and signing off on hers and slumlord's properties, including the condo, which is against Florida code enforcement conduct laws. I found out from neighbors in the condo that slumlord had only been renting to seniors with severe health issues. My best discovery though, next to tax evasion, was finding out that the Condo Owners Association had a very strict no renting/leasing policy, meaning you or family had to live in the condo and it could not be rented. The revenge. Now that we had all of our evidence, my husband and I began to knock down all of the slumlord's dominoes. My husband went and filed a complaint with the Miami Police Department about corrupt code enforcement wife and her perjuring inspections on her family properties. My husband has a glowing record in Seminole County and with the FDLE for having over 200 clean arrests and taking down nearly 60 corrupt public officials, including Child Protective Services in the early 2000s. This background helped push WGPD to open an investigation into corrupt code enforcement wife. They discovered that not only had she perjured inspections on her family properties, but also on my husband's self-entitled aunt and uncle's property as well. This got corrupt code enforcement wife fired, stripped of her state enforcement officer's license, and convicted of multiple crimes. I sent all property tax fraud evidence to the FL's property tax division that got the state to investigate slumlord. The state found that not only did he commit property tax fraud on the condo, but also on a property that he was renting to his son and self-entitled aunt's son, along with business tax fraud and income tax fraud. Both slumlord's son and self-entitled aunt's son were also busted for possession of illegal narcotics with intent to sell when investigators came to the rental house they lived at. I never expected that much fraud to be found from all of this, but I am glad it happened. The business tax fraud of slumlord affected self-entitled aunt and self-entitled uncle as well, since they were his business partners. Self-entitled uncle then came under investigation by the USPS board as he was the postmaster of Miami. Self-entitled uncle lost his comfy job and pension after it was discovered how he was assisting slumlord in the tax fraud scam and for stealing money orders. All four were convicted of multiple white-collar crimes, had to sell their properties and most of their stuff, serve some form of time and pay huge amounts of fines and restitution. Slumlord, his wife, hubby's self-entitled aunt and hubby's self-entitled uncle, along with their sons, all went down for multiple crimes, both felonies and misdemeanors, all because they thought they could strong-arm evictors. That just proves how smart we tenants can really be when pushed. Also proves why everyone should know all rental laws and how to research public records, because it can save you in the end. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.